Hello everyone, I'm Jean-Michel Grosjeu and welcome to the 8th video in my series about the complete rule set of Space Empires, a game by Jim Crone and its 3 expansions, Close Encounters, Replicators and All Good Things. And this 8th video will be a long one because today we are going to review together all the available ships and technologies. And to begin with, do you remember the facilities? These buildings are used to produce specialized resources. There are 4 of them. Industrial centers which produce CPs, construction points. Research centers which produce RPs, research points. Logistic centers which produce LPs, logistic points. And finally, temporal centers which produce TPs, temporal points. Now, let me remind you of the basic rules we already saw in video number 4. Facilities can be built on any colony. No shipyard is required. Each facility costs 5 CPs and produces 5 of its own points, CPs, RPs, LPs or TPs, during each economic phase. Only one facility can be built per colony, and then the entire colony produces the same type of resources. A logistic center on a stage 3 colony produces 5 plus 3 equal 8 logistic points during the economic phase. And it produces nothing else. Okay, but each player's home planet is an exception. First, you can build 2 facilities on a home planet instead of just 1. This can be 2 of the same facility or 2 different facilities. And the planet itself always produces 20 CPs regardless of the facilities built on it. Yellow player's home planet, for example, produces 20 CPs, 5 RPs and 5 LPs in each economic phase. And that's exactly how a game is set up. At the beginning of the game, each player places a research center and a logistic center on his home planet. Research centers. We already learned these in detail in video number 4, so I won't go over them again. They produce RPs, which are used to purchase technologies. You can keep a maximum of 30 RPs to carry over to the next economic phase. Then, there are industrial centers. These are very simple because they produce CPs. So, building an industrial center on a planet just boosts that planet's production. A standard colony with an industrial center produces twice as many CPs, the 5 basic CPs plus the 5 CPs from the industrial center. Now, let's look at the other 2, logistic and temporal, which are really new, but first, some little obvious advice. You should build a facility on each of your colonies. It's a profitable investment, and your only choice is which facility to build from the 4 available. That being said, there's no need to put pressure on yourself. If you make a choice that you later regret, you can always destroy facility and build another instead. Of course, in doing so, you will lose 5 CPs, the construction cost that you don't get back when you destroy the building, but at least you're allowed to change your mind or your strategy during the game. Now let's talk about logistic centers, and please watch out, this is a big one. As we've just seen, each player has a logistic center on his home planet at the beginning of the game. So, from the very first economic phase, each player gains 5 logistic points, 5 LPs. So, why do you need logistic points? Well, logistic points are the currency you use to pay for maintenance. I know some of you were worrying about that. Well, now it's finally time to talk about this very important topic, maintenance. So I'll get my little optional sign out right away because this way of managing maintenance with logistic points is brand new since the All Good Things expansion, and it radically changes the balance of the game. So I'll explain now how it works, and then I will explain how to do without it if you don't like it, and it will be up to you to choose whether you play with logistic centers or not. Now, let's get started. During the economic phase, right after collecting your resources, you must pay for the maintenance of all your ships. Maintenance is paid with LPs, and each ship requires a number of LPs equal to its hull size. So far, so good. The problem is that you must transport this maintenance, ammunition, spare parts, to your war fleets. So in order to supply a ship, that ship must be within the logistic range of one of your colonies or your home planet, of course. And the basic logistic range is 1 hexagon. Yes, you heard right. In order to receive maintenance, a ship must be adjacent to one of the planets you control. This is called the supply range. In this example, a small fleet of 2 scouts is 1 hexagon away from its home planet. Yellow player therefore pays 2 LPs for maintenance, 2 times 1. The remaining 3 LPs are carried over to the next economic phase. There is no limit to the number of LPs you can have in stock, so you can carry over as many as you want from one economic phase to the next. But a range of 1, you might say, that's so small. In fact, the actual value of this range is your level in the supply range technology. So, if over the course of the economic phase you pay 10 plus 15 plus 15, that's 40 RPs, you get the maximum supply range of 4, and you'll be able to pay for your fleet's maintenance with LPs that we've just seen up to a distance of 4 hexagons. Okay, but be careful, you must imagine this supply as a series of round trips by cargo ships that actually deliver ammunition and spare parts. So, 1 to 4 hexagon supply route cannot pass through an hexagon with enemies or aliens, or simply an enemy-controlled planet. It can neither pass through an unexplored hexagon, or a space station, or quantum filaments, or a storm, whether plasma or ionic, or a black hole. However, in the latter case, if there are 2 pipelines, one of which is in the black hole hexagon, then okay, the supply line is valid. In this example, the yellow scout fleet is not supplied even with the maximum supply range technology of 4, unless yellow player has 2 pipelines like this, for example. Supply lines allow you to pay for supplies with LPs for fleets that are within supply range. Fine, but what happens if you don't have enough LPs? In our example, we assume that there are 6 scouts in the yellow fleet. The fleet is at a safe distance from its home planet. We assume that the supply range is 4. It can therefore be supplied. 6 size 1 ships cost 6 LPs, but we only have 5. So first, we must spend everything we have, 5 LPs. Then we must pay for the remaining LPs with CPs, but with a ratio, an exchange rate, of 3 CPs for 1 LP. There's a special line in the table to remind you of this. And there you have it, your fleet is supplied. So, you see, you can even manage maintenance without any LPs at all, but it can end up costing you a lot in CPs with a rate of 3 CPs for each 1 LP. And then, what happens if, despite all of your efforts, you don't have enough LPs and CPs to pay for the maintenance of your forces? Well, nothing happens. The only problem is that you are at the beginning of the economic phase and you have no CP left, so you won't be able to buy anything. Maintenance is mandatory, you must pay for it, and what you spend next is only what's left of your CPs after paying for maintenance. Note that you can always scuttle units, that is, destroy them voluntarily, so you don't have to pay for their maintenance. Okay, but there's one last question, and it's an important one. What happens to ships that are not within the supply range of a friendly planet? For example, these 4 cruisers are 1 hexagon too far from their nearest friendly planet, so first we put a token on them to indicate that this fleet is not supplied. And since these units are not supplied, the player does not pay any LP for them. Great, right? There's nothing to pay. Of course not. It's not so simple, because unsupplied units will perform much worse. First, each ship in the out-of-supply fleet must roll a die and is eliminated on a result of 9 or 10. On our example, 2 ships are eliminated. And the 2 remaining cruisers will keep the out-of-supply marker for the next 3 turns until the next economic phase. And during those 3 turns, they will only be able to move 1 hexagon per turn regardless of their movement technology, and they will suffer a -3 penalty to attack and defense. Note that this does not affect attack and defense technologies, only the values written on the token. For example, these out-of-supply cruisers will attack with 1 attack and 0 defense, the minimum, but with a +1 attack and +2 defense if they have these technologies at levels 1 and 2. Fine, and besides this, some units do not need to pay maintenance at all. Colony ships, miners, pipelines. In short, all non-combat ships, but also decoys, of course, and shipyards and bases which are combat units but attached to a planet. And finally, mines. We'll see a little later what bases and mines are. In short, in these 7 cases, there are no maintenance costs to pay, and therefore these units do not need to respect the supply range. And this is shown in the unit list. You cannot miss it. Finally, there are special units that are always considered as supplied. These are units that, by their very nature, are meant to act alone, far from their bases. All ground units, which we'll see in video number 9, but also raiders and scouts. This is interesting for scouts because it allows you to make initial explorations at the beginning of the game without having to worry about supply, and we'll see very soon what raiders are. And any unit exploring deep space on its own is considered to be in supply. Please note that this is very specific. We are talking about a single ship alone with a level 1 exploration technology, so it must be a cruiser or a flagship, in deep space and not currently engaged in combat, which means that it did not take part in any combat during the 3 rounds before the economic phase. In short, all these special units are always considered to be in supply, and note that still these units must pay for maintenance like any other combat unit. They must pay with LPs, but they do not need to remain within the supply range of a friendly planet, colony or home planet. They will never suffer any penalties for not being supplied. They are simply free to go wherever they want. As you can see, logistic points do change the dynamics of the game. Supply range limits the range of your fleets and forces you to conquer intermediate planets in order to advance step by step rather than directly invading your enemy's system. And I can hear you protesting, but I still want to be able to build up a large fleet in secret and launch a surprise attack directly on my neighbor's home planet. Well, don't worry, it's still possible. Let's consider this new example. The blue fleet is 7 hexagons away from the yellow home planet. With the move technology at level 5, it can make this 7 hexagon move in 3 turns and launch a surprise attack. Of course, it's very risky because if the assault fails and blue fleet has to retreat or stay there in the yellow planet's hexagon, in the following economic phase, it will no longer be in supply. it will lose an average of 1 unit in 5 due to out-of-supply die rolls, and then it will only have a 1 hexagon move capacity to fly back home with almost no attack or defense capacity. But there is another solution thanks to Logistic Groups. A logistic group is a token that represents 5 logistic points or 5 LPs. And you can multiply this value by using a numeral token up to 6 as usual. So a logistic group with a numeral token of 6 is worth 6 times 5 equals 30 LPs. A logistic group can be created on any colony, no shipyard is required. The logistic group is created face down so your opponents won't know that it's a logistic group. Next, if you want to move the logistic group, you need a transport ship. We'll see how this type of ship works in video number 9, since transport ships are made to transport ground troops. Just keep in mind that there are 6 slots inside the transport ship's cargo hold. In other words, a transport ship can carry 6 units, so if you fill it with logistic groups, it can hold 6, that is 30 LPs. And so you can see where I'm going. At any time, you can use the transported LPs to pay for the maintenance of ships in the same hexagon. Be careful though, because there is no supply range anymore, a logistic group can only be used in its own hexagon. From there, several cases are possible. First, you can use a logistic group to pay for maintenance during the economic phase. In this case, units are supplied and suffer no penalties and no die rolls. Let's go back to our former example. Blue player doesn't want to bother conquering all the planets between his forces and their goal. They have the right level of move technology, let's say 5, so in 3 turns, they swoop down on yellow player's home planet, there is a battle, and note that this is the moment when blue player must reveal the logistic groups he is transporting. As soon as the battle begins, there are no more secrets. Okay, we won't go into all details about this battle, but let's assume that in the end, blue player has destroyed all the yellow defense ships, but not yellow ground defenses. So there's a blockade situation with blue air forces surrounding a planet protected by yellow ground forces. We will see that in detail in the next video number 9. Economic phase. It's time to pay for maintenance. The blue fleet is too far from its bases, it is out of supply, but it is where blue player can use his logistic group to supply his fleet. 4 dreadnoughts with a hull size of 3 and 1 transport with a size of 1. Don't forget that the transport ship also needs to be refueled. That's a requirement of 13 LPs, 13 logistic points. And since each logistic group unit represents 5 LPs, the 3 that blue player took within his fleet represent 15 LPs. Perfect, it's enough. He discards them and the fleet is supplied. No die roll and no penalty for the next 3 turns. Note that since each logistic group point represents 5 LPs, you must spend them in increments of 5. Here the cost was 13 and we had to spend 15 LPs. When it doesn't work out exactly, there's no way to make change and the excess is lost. Also note that if blue player hadn't taken enough logistic groups, there could have been a mix of in-supply and out-of-supply units within his fleet. And finally, one last little example before we move on. Let's suppose that blue player makes the same attack against the yellow home planet, but without bringing logistic groups with him. In fact, the required logistic groups are not so far away in their transport ship, but they are late. So at the beginning of the economic phase, the 4 dreadnoughts are out of supply. No way to avoid rolling the dice to see if they survive. Luckily, none of them are eliminated, but they do get the out of supply marker and all the penalties that go with it. For its part, the transport ship must be supplied. We assume that blue player has level 4 supply range technology, so he refuels up to a distance of 4 hexagons. He pays 1 LP from his reserve, and the transport ship is refueled in game turns he paid for maintenance. And then we start the next turn. We said that all blue players' ships have level 5 move technology, but for now, the dreadnoughts on the yellow planet are reduced to 1 movement point because they are out of supply. Turn 1, the dreadnoughts can only move 1 space, but the transport ship can move 2 spaces, so they end the turn stacked. And just then, still on turn 1, blue player can declare that he is using his logistic groups to refuel the 4 dreadnoughts. He must pay 12 LPs, 3 times 4, but he spends all 3 logistic groups because he cannot make change. In any case, the dreadnoughts are now supplied. They discard their out-of-supply marker, and from turn 2 onwards, they no longer suffer penalties and can, for example, move 2 spaces. Logistic groups are not necessarily used during the economic phase. They can be used at any time to free some ships from out-of-supply penalties. And finally, you must know that logistic points are also used to change the player order. This is some kind of auction that happens during each economic phase, right after paying maintenance. Players secretly allocate LPs to bid on the order of players. It's a hidden auction. Everyone writes down their bid on their sheet, and beware, even if it appears in the CP box on the production sheet, this auction is made with LPs. You cannot even use CPs with the 3-for-1 rule. No, this 3-for-1 exchange rate is only for maintenance. For the player order auction, you need LPs, so you'd better keep some after paying maintenance. Then players go on with the economic phase as usual, spending their CPs and RPs. Then they improve their colonies, and only at the very end do they reveal their bids. Everyone spends the LPs they committed, not just the winner, and the winner of the auction can choose who will be the first player for the next 3 rounds. He can choose whoever he wants, not necessarily himself. And starting with that first player, the others will play in clockwise order. Fine, now you know everything there is to know about LPs, and it is up to you to decide whether you want to play with LPs or not. Personally, I prefer to play with them, but it's up to you. If you remove LPs, you no longer manage supply range and out-of-supply status, and your fleets can fly across the universe without any risk. However, you still pay maintenance, but by spending CPs instead of LPs and without using the 3-for-1 ratio. And finally, the temporal centers which produce temporal points or TPs. As with all other facilities buildings, you can build a temporal center on any colony you control, but since you can only build one facilities building, if you build a temporal center, you cannot build anything else. And you'll understand that with more types of facilities buildings, players now face some real tough choices. So, let's suppose you build a temporal center on a colony, it costs 5 CPs, and starting with the next economic phase, it produces 5 TPs, 5 temporal points. You write them down in the bottom section of your production sheet, and whatever you don't spend is carried over to the next economic phase, with no limit. If you don't spend anything, you can store as many TPs as you want. Okay, but what's the point? Well, temporal points are a kind of energy like magic mana that you can use with temporal engines to cast temporal effects. Okay, so temporal centers produce temporal points, I understand, but where do we find temporal engines? Temporal engines are always associated to shipyards, bases and star bases. All these are fixed units attached to a planet. But there is also a fourth type of temporal engine that can be associated to a ship. The exact type of ship is randomly determined at the beginning of the game from the following: Scout SC, Cruiser CA, Destroyer DD, Transport T, Carrier CV or Minesweeper SW. This list includes ships that you don't know yet, but we will see them very soon. In short, one type of ship is randomly selected, and it will be the same for all players. For example, if a CA cruiser is randomly selected at the beginning of the game, then throughout the entire game, all players' cruisers will also be temporal engines. So, from there, the simplest thing is to think of temporal effects as magical spells. The game provides a list of these. Here it is. Effects are grouped in three categories. The first 7 effects only apply to the hexagon where the temporal engine is located, so the shipyard, the base, the starbase, or the right type of ship. The next 3 effects can apply to targets up to 3 hexagons away from the temporal engine. And finally, the last 3 apply regardless of where the temporal engine is. Let's see a quick example. The long-range scanner. For 15 temporal points, a player can peek at the identity and number of ships in an enemy group, so 1 token, within a range of 3 hexagons from one of his temporal engines. This is a good illustration of what temporal effects are. They are powers that are not always very impressive, but used at the right time and in the right place, they can change the course of the game. And you must know the impressive Fall of an Empire, which requires moving one of your temporal engines to an enemy player's colony and spending 350 temporal points. Then, this enemy player is immediately eliminated from the game. All his forces disappear and it's game over for him. Note that this doesn't end the game, because in order to win, a player must control another player's home planet, which is not the case after triggering the Fall of an Empire temporal effect. Now, at last, we're really done with facilities and all the types of points they can produce. And before we move on, I propose we take a refreshing break with Flagships. Each player owns a flagship at the beginning of the game. This is his own flagship, which represents his own stellar empire. It has a name, Argo for yellow player, and for the others it is Victory, Enterprise or Thunderchild. It's a unique ship, so its numerical counter is always a 1. If it's destroyed, it cannot be built again. As you can see, it's a pretty good ship in combat, but its main appeal is that players have it from the beginning of the game at a time when it's their best combat ship. It doesn't require maintenance, so it's free from any supply range penalty, and this makes it some kind of a free agent that can explore far from its bases like a scout ship. And also, the flagship can be upgraded with fast and exploration technologies by spending RPs. So, this ship is not that special, but it has some sentimental value for players, and no one, believe me, wants to suffer the humiliation of having his flagship shot down. And we've been talking about fast technology several times, so let's see now into detail, but actually, there's not much to say. There are 2 levels of fast technology, but for now we are only interested in the first one. Its effect is to add 1 movement point to the first of the 3 turns in the cycle. So, remember this table that shows movement capacities for each turn based on the move technology. Well, if we add level 1 fast technology, we get this. Fast technology only affects the first turn of the cycle, and the maximum speed with move technology level 7 plus fast technology level 1 is 10 hexagons every 3 turns. Please note that only heavy cruisers, BC, flagships and decoys can benefit from this technology. And since flagships and decoys are a bit special, just remember that heavy cruisers are the ships that can go a little faster than the rest of the fleet. Next, we move on to cloaking technology. At level 1, you can build raiders. We will see later several other technologies like this. This type of technology mainly unlocks the construction of a new type of ship. Here, cloaking technology unlocks raiders. A raider is a combat unit. You'll notice that its class and attack strength are double, AD 4-5. That's because raiders are stealth units. By default, their stealth equipment is on, and they fight with an A class and a +1 attack bonus in the first round. So A5 in the first round and A4 thereafter. But their stealth capacity allows them to do much more than that. During its turn, a raider can move through an enemy unit. Here, the yellow raider, face down, doesn't want to fly through the black hole, so on his turn to move, let's assume he can move 2 hexagons, hop, hop, he flies through the blue fleet unseen and undetected. Of course, when making this move, yellow player must announce that there are only raiders in this fleet. If there is any other ship, the fleet cannot fly through enemy units like this. And there's even more. If yellow player doesn't have enough move technology to use 2 movement points on that turn, that same raider fleet can enter blue fleet's hexagon and stay there without fighting. Again, yellow player announces that there are only raiders in his fleet, and that's it. There is no combat, and the 2 enemy fleets remain in the same hexagon. And it works the other way around too. It's blue player turns, he attacks a yellow fleet, but yellow player declares that this fleet contains only raiders, so there is no combat and everyone stays where he is. Note that in all cases, blue player is not required to reveal his units. His units remain face down, raiders do not gather information about enemy units. Actually, that's not entirely true. With a little trick, you can use your raiders as spies. Let's take an example where a raider is part of a fleet that contains other units, let's say cruisers. Here, I'll show you the ships, but in a real situation, units are hidden. Fine. If one fleet enters the other player's hexagon, it doesn't matter if it's yellow attacking or blue. The fleet stops and there is a battle. And the raider cannot stay hidden because it's not alone. There are also cruisers in the same fleet. Combat resolution, both sides reveal their units. Blue ships are scouts, so yellow isn't too much worried, but still, with 5 ships against 5, yellow cannot take advantage of screening to protect his raider, and there's a risk that it will be killed by a lucky scout shot. It's unlikely, but it's possible. Well, since the raider is stealthy, he always can retreat at the very beginning of a combat, just after learning about the enemy forces before screening. Here, yellow player decides to move his raider back 1 hexagon so that he doesn't risk anything. This is better than a normal retreat because the raider doesn't have to wait for a whole round of combat, nor does he have to wait for his turn to shoot. But above all, this special retreat before combat opens up interesting possibilities for raiders. Look, same example as before, yellow fleet contains only raiders, it enters the blue fleet's hexagon, but this time, instead of declaring it will stay there invisible, which it could do, it declares that it accepts combat. Combat phase, everyone reveals their troop, and now the yellow raider use their stealth capacity to retreat. The result is the same, they don't fight, and they reveal blue ship's identity, so you can use your raider to gather information about enemy fleets. The only problem being that each time your raider must retreat to an adjacent hexagon, but hey, it's manageable. And note also that blue ships are revealed to all players as in any standard battle. Finally, note that raiders are always considered in supply, so they must pay maintenance like any other unit, but they don't suffer penalties if they are not within a friendly planet's supply range. And this makes them the ideal spy unit to send behind enemy lines. But of course, there is a way to protect yourself from raiders, and that's the scanner technology. Pretty simple. A ship equipped with a scanner detects raiders in its own hex and cancels all their advantages. First, instead of fighting as Class A, the detected raider must use Class D and a strength of 4 without the +1 bonus for surprise. More than that, a detected raider cannot fly through enemy units, cannot avoid combat, and cannot retreat before combat. But the scanner technology can only be equipped on destroyers, DD, so you need a destroyer in your fleet to protect it from raiders. But hey, it's worth it just for the pleasure of being able to say to your opponent, "Hop, you cannot fly through my fleet, you must stop right there and I can attack you." But then, the raider can choose to upgrade its cloaking technology to level 2. In this case, level 1 scanner technology isn't enough to detect it, and the raider regains all its stealth capacities. Except that, you guess it, against level 2 scanner, level 2 cloaking is not more sufficient. The scanner blocks the raider's cloaking if its level is higher than or equal to the cloaking level, and that's where it ends. Neither technology can exceed level 2, and when they are equal, scanner wins. Note that the ship technology sheet helps you manage all these. For example, on the raider lines, there is a slot for cloaking technology level 2. Only raiders have this indication, reminding you that only raiders can benefit from this technology. And only level 2 because level 1 corresponds to the simple existence of the raider, which can only be built with this technology. The same goes for the destroyer line, which offers levels 1 and 2 in the scanner technology, reminding you that only destroyers can benefit from this technology. And one last thing before we close the subject, cloaking doesn't work inside Nebula. That's just the way it is, don't ask me why. These are the limits of technology. Now let's move on to the fighter technology. As its name suggests, with the level 1 of this technology, you can build fighters, the ships with the letter F. As you can see, this is a unit with no class, no attack and no defense, and yet it is a combat unit. It's just that its characteristics depends on the level of the fighter technology, according to this little table. So, the fighter is actually a very good combat unit, especially when you consider that it only costs 5 CPs to build. Beware, in order to reach level 4, you need another technology as a prerequisite, Advanced Construction level 2, which we'll see later. Okay. Fighters are great, but you already know the big weakness of these units. A fighter cannot move by itself. It cannot leave the hexagon it is in. Worse than that, even if it stays in its hexagon, it must be constantly supported by a larger structure, the carrier, abbreviation CV. In other words, there must always be one carrier for every 3 fighters in an hexagon. For example, in this hexagon there are 2 ship carriers for 5 fighters, so that's fine. The ratio of 1 to 3 is okay. Note that you don't have to decide which fighter is attached to which carrier. It doesn't matter as long as the ratio of 1 carrier for 3 fighters is okay. And so, fighters cannot leave their hexagon unless they are accompanied by enough carriers. And if at any time any player realizes that the ratio is no longer respected, for whatever reason, enough fighters must be immediately eliminated to go back to a 1-to-3 ratio. Note that there is one major exception to this rule: a fighter can also be based on a colony. Just imagine that each colony is equipped with airfields that can accommodate as many fighters as you want. So, on a colony, there is no need for CVs. Let's say, for example, there's a shipyard on this yellow colony. The shipyard can produce fighters that can remain attached to that colony. They can even fight if the hexagon is attacked. However, they cannot leave the hexagon. They can only leave it if a carrier comes to pick them up. In combat, fighters fight like any other unit, but if they are in the same hexagon as their carrier ship, they defend it. The rule is simple: the enemy cannot target a carrier as long as there are fighters in the same hexagon. And there's no need to wonder which fighter belongs to which carrier. No, even if you end up with 2 carriers and only 1 fighter, the enemy cannot fire on a carrier as long as a fighter is in the battle. Beware, a fighter in screening mode is out of combat and therefore no longer protects its carrier. In other words, unless you have a very good reason, don't put your fighters in screening. Retreating is a little trickier. First, and this is the easy part, a fighter cannot retreat on its own without its carrier. However, if the two synchronize correctly, the fighters can go back to the carrier's cargo base and the carrier can retreat with them inside. Here's how it works. The fighters are activated first since they are class B, but at this point they declare that they want to retreat and they do not fire. However, they remain where they are, they do not retreat immediately, and among other things, they can still be fired at. Then, when it's the carrier's turn, class E, everyone retreats and leaves the battle. The carriers and their fighters with a ratio of 3 fighters to 1 carrier. Note that since the carriers have some sense of responsibility, they cannot retreat and leave fighters behind. So, in our example, a carrier can retreat on its own, leaving the fighter behind because there is still 1 carrier to take care of it. But if there are 4 fighters, it is not possible anymore. Now, despite these limitations, the carrier-fighter combination is a very effective weapon that can also be frightening in the hands of your opponents. Fortunately, as always, there is a way to defend yourself, and that is the point defense technology. This technology can only equip a ship we already know very well, the Scout. With the point defense technology, if a scout ship fires at an enemy fighter, the scout gets a class of A and an attack strength of 6 instead of its usual E3, which is a significant upgrade. However, this does not change anything in terms of defense. And that's for level 1 point defense technology. At level 2 it becomes A7 and at level 3 A8. So once again, it's going to be an arms race between an empire developing fighters and their carriers, and its enemies developing scouts with point defense technology. And of course, the best way to be victorious is to keep it all secret and rely on surprise. If you remember, we saw this in the previous video. Alien ships protect barren planets in deep space, and these alien ships get by default point defense technology at level 2, at least some of their ships, the ones with a hull size of 1. So, just keep in mind that fighters are not the best weapon against aliens. And that brings us to the next technology, because carriers have a serious weakness: mines. A mine is the only weapon that can attack and destroy a carrier, even if it is protected by its fighters. Let's see how it works. Once you develop the mines technology, which has only 1 level, you can build mines with your shipyards. The mine behaves like any other combat ship with the same back, making it indistinguishable from a regular ship. However, it is still a very special unit because it has no combat value, No class, no attack, no defense, and no hit points. A mine works as follows. At the beginning of a battle between a yellow fleet and a red fleet, for example, both players reveal their units. Red player reveals 2 carriers with their 6 fighters, 4 battle cruisers, and 3 scouts. A strong fleet that costs a lot of money. On the other side, yellow player reveals 5 mines, and red player immediately understands the catastrophe that is going to happen because here is how mines work. Mines always attack immediately at the beginning of combat, before screening, as soon as units are revealed. And this is not a normal attack, it's a detonation. No die roll, one mine destroys one enemy ship and that's it. Any enemy ship, even a carrier with its fighter still there and supposed to protect it. In our example, with 5 mines, yellow player chooses to destroy the 2 carrier ships and 3 battle cruisers. The 5 mines have exploded, so they are also destroyed. A mine only works once. And the battle is over, and you can see what a disaster it is for red player. The 6 fighters without their carriers are eliminated unless the battle took place on a red colony hexagon, and he only has 3 scouts and 1 battle cruiser left. Okay, now that you understand how frightening these weapons are, let's dive into details. First, you must consider that mines always come with some utility ships that can transport them from one point to another. In other words, mine tokens can move on their own, they don't need any transport ship, they already have their own, but only 1 hexagon per turn, regardless of their move technology level. And of course, mines cannot explore and therefore they cannot enter an unexplored hexagon on their own. And then, what makes their use a little complex is that mines are purely defensive weapons. They don't fire at their opponent, they deploy to form a kind of space minefield, and they wait quietly for the enemy fleet to come and explode on them. In terms of gameplay, this means that a mine unit, even if it is accompanied by lots of friendly ships, a mine cannot enter an hexagon with an enemy unit in it. In this example, yellow player has a small fleet with 2 destroyers and 3 mines. This means they can destroy any 3 of blue player's units. Of course, all this is hidden and blue player has no idea of this frightening threat. But the problem for yellow player is that when it's his turn to play, he cannot move forward into either of the 2 hexagons in front of him, and this is because the mines inside his fleet cannot enter a hexagon with an enemy fleet, or even an hexagon with an enemy colony. In fact, if yellow player wants to use his mines effectively, his strategy is to stay where he is and wait for the blue fleet to enter his own hexagon. Then, the mines explode and destroy 1 ship each. So as you can see, mines are very powerful but subtle weapons. They require you to successfully lure your enemy into the trap you have set. And where your enemy sees one of your fleets stopping at its border and not attacking, you can be sure he strongly suspects that there may be some mines inside. Note, in our example, that yellow player cannot choose not to use his mines in combat. In combat, mines explode first, and as long as there are targets to destroy, mines must explode. So be careful. If your opponent has any doubts, he can send a fleet of scout ships, for example, that he doesn't care so much, in order to detonate your mines, whether you want them to or not. Note that mines cannot retreat to avoid exploding because they explode before the beginning of combat, before retreating. And I'm sure you've already guessed there's another way to get rid of mines, and a much more effective way: Minesweepers SW on the token. To build a Minesweeper, you need the minesweeping technology, at least at level 1. The Minesweeper is a combat ship, although with its class E and attack of 1, it's really not recommended to send it into the fray, because its most effective attack takes place at the very beginning of combat, before mines explode. Here is exactly how it works. 1. The Minesweepers destroy mines. Each level 1 Minesweeper destroys 1 mine. Level 2 Minesweepers destroy 2 mines, and level 3 Minesweepers destroy 3 mines. And since the battle has not yet begun, mines have no way of escaping the Minesweepers. They cannot, for example, take advantage of screening. Then 2. The surviving mines attack. They attack whoever they want, just as we saw. They can even attack the Minesweepers. Why not? And finally, 3. The standard combat resolution with the Minesweepers fighting as any other ships. Next technology, boarding. If you have boarding level 1, you can build boarding ships identified by letters BD. These are fairly strong attack ships with an attack value of 5 or even 6 if you have level 2 boarding technology, but they are not fast with a class of F. So, as combat ships, they don't seem to be the best ships for your fleet, but they are the only ships that can carry out boarding maneuvers. These are special attacks whose goal is not to destroy the enemy ship, but to capture it. Let's take an example to see how it works. In this red fleet, there is a carrier with a single unit of level 2 fighters, class B, attack 6, and defense 0, plus 2 battle cruisers, and this little fleet attacks a yellow fleet with 2 dreadnoughts, 4 cruisers, and 2 boarding ships. Yellow fleet gets a +1 fleet bonus because it is twice as large. It could decide to put 4 ships in screening, but it prefers not to. Class A, the dreadnoughts target the fighter, but they are unlucky, so Class B, the fighter and the 2 battle cruisers eliminate a yellow cruiser. Class C, bad luck for the remaining 3 cruisers. And finally Class E, the carrier, feeling the danger, tries its luck against the boarding ships and inflict 1 damage on them. And here we are at Class F, when the 2 boarding ships can strike. First, we note that they could try a standard attack with their strength of 5, why not? But that would be a waste because look at what they can do. First, they declare a boarding attack. The boarding attack is resolved like a standard attack, but with some changes, because the result you want to get is a die roll equal to or less than the strength of the boarding ship, so 5 or 6 depending on the level of boarding technology, minus the hull size of its target. So right away we can see that neither of the 2 usual technologies, attack and defense, come into play, and there's no fleet size bonus either. Here, the first boarding ship is trying to capture a red battle cruiser, attack 5, target size 2, it must therefore roll a 3. It fails, but there is a second boarding ship that can also try. 1. The boarding is a success and the battle cruiser is captured. And from that point on, what happens? First, the captured ship must be replaced by a yellow player token because now it belongs to the yellow side. 1 battle cruiser moves to the yellow side and the other remains red. This is because only one of the 2 has been captured. The captured ship keeps all its technologies, which yellow player copies from red player's sheet, but only for that captured ship. Before that, red player had a group of 2 ships with 4 technologies. Now, each player has a group of 1 ship with the same technologies, and this happens even if the yellow empire as a whole does not master these technologies. And then the battle goes on. But first, you need to know that a captured ship cannot attack or retreat during the round following its capture. Just imagine the chaos inside the ship. It takes at least 1 round for the attackers to take control of the bridge, the weapons, and to manage the crew. During this lost round, the captured ship doesn't count for screening or fleet bonus. The yellow fleet still get the fleet bonus with 7 ships against 3, but it can only put 4 ships in screening, 7 minus 3. However, it can put the newly captured ship in screening so that it cannot be attacked by its former colleagues from the red side. The captured ship is not counted in the screening calculation, but it can benefit from it once the calculation has been made. Fine. I won't go on with this example because you know how a battle works. Ships fire at each other and the 2 yellow boarding ships can still try to capture another ship if they want to. From the next round onwards, so 2 rounds after the battlecruiser is captured, there are no more restrictions and the captured ship can fight for the yellow side as a normal yellow ship. And there you go. You've got the hang of it, it's not that complicated. Boarding ships can capture enemy ships and turn them into their color. But be careful, there are still exceptions. Some ships cannot be captured. First, the basic rule, if you cannot shoot at a unit, you cannot try to board it. So no boarding against a unit protected by screening, and no boarding against a carrier if there are fighters still able to fight. In our example, the boarding ships cannot capture the carrier and fighters can never be captured. That's obvious. You cannot board a small and light single pilot ship. So in our example, there was no other choice than to capture the battle cruisers. No boarding either against bases, shipyards or colonies. And finally, a boarding ship cannot capture a transport ship that is carrying something. We'll see how transport ships work in the next video. So an empty transport ship can be captured, but as soon as it's carrying something, it's no longer possible. Finally, sorry to disappoint you, but you cannot capture a Titan, the largest ship in the game. It is too big, it's impossible to board them. But note, because this is funny, that you can board and then capture an enemy boarding ship, and then, why not, use it to board ships from its former color. Now, what do we do if yellow player captures a red battlecruiser but has no more of his own yellow battlecruiser counters available? He has lots of yellow battlecruiser all over the board and his stock is exhausted. Well, first, during the battle, he does with what he has. Yellow player captures 1 red battlecruiser, for example, and for the duration of the battle, he uses a neutral token to represent this ship. Usually we use an alien ship token, but the captured battlecruiser keeps all its own characteristics. Of course, it doesn't become an alien ship. It's a bit of bookkeeping and it's okay for the duration of a battle, but it's not a solution that can last for the entire game. So when the battle is over, the problem must be solved. Yellow player must use one of his own counters to represent the captured ship. So there's no choice. Either he scuttles one of his yellow battlecruisers somewhere to get a token back, or he eliminates the ship he just captured. So in this case, the captured ship was only used for 1 combat. Okay, you get the point of capturing a ship. It allows you to strengthen your fleet with ships you steal from one of your opponents. It's a double win, +1 ship for you and -1 for your enemy. But there's more. In our example, as yellow player, the red ship I captured has access to technologies that I, as yellow player, don't know about. Here is my sheet. I own 3 battlecruiser groups that benefit from the technologies I have developed: level 1 attack, level 2 tactics and level 3 move. Note that my BC1 group is not technologically up to date. It needs to go back to a shipyard in order to upgrade, but for the moment it will be okay like that. My general technology levels can be seen at the bottom of my production sheet. 1 in attack, 2 in tactics, and 3 in move. That's the overall levels for my entire empire. Then my boarding ships capture an enemy battlecruiser for which I use my BC4 token, and it doesn't have the same technologies. Except for tactics, it is better in every technology. And since I captured it, I should be able to hand it over to my scientists who will dissect it and study it. So first step, bring the captured ship back to a shipyard. Then, during the economic phase, automatically and free of charge, yellow player's general technology is increased by 1 wherever the captured ship's technology is better. In our example, after bringing the captured battlecruiser back to a yellow shipyard, yellow player gains 1 move level and he can even gain 1 level in defense and fast technology. We are 2 technologies he didn't even know about. Note that for the defense technology, this capture is not enough for Yellow Empire to catch up with Red Empire's level, and this is because only 1 technology level can be gained with 1 captured ship. If the player captures 2 red battlecruisers and brings them both back to a shipyard, then yes, he can gain 2 defense levels at once. However, be careful, the captured ship is eliminated in the process. It has been completely stripped by engineers and it is no longer usable. And you can also see that technologies that are stolen from your opponent do not immediately benefit your yellow ships. Obviously, as usual, your ships must fly back to your shipyards and pay their hull size in CP to upgrade. Now, you understand the dilemma of capture. Either you keep the captured ships and use them directly to fight amongst your fleets, or you strip them down and steal their technology, which can benefit your entire empire. Beware, some technologies cannot be stolen from captured ships. Here is the list, and yes, you don't know most of them yet, and that's why there are 2 more videos after this one. I should add that you cannot capture more than the level 1 fighter technology when capturing a carrier, and finally you can improve your ship size technology through capture. If my ship size technology level is 2 and one of my boarding ships capture a ship that I am not able to build, well, if I strip it down in one of my shipyards, I gain +1 in ship size technology, which instantly benefits all my shipyards. But then again, I lose the ship that I probably had a lot of trouble capturing. This is the kind of decision that takes a long time to weigh up. Fine, but as you can imagine, there are ways to protect yourself against boarding, and that's the security force technology. It's basically keeping combat units inside your ships to repel attackers. There are 2 possible levels, Security Forces 1 and Security Forces 2, and this level simply increases your ship's resistance to capture. Note that Security Forces technology is not listed on the ship technology sheet, and this is because this technology is not attached to each ship. All you need to do is upgrade your Security Forces level, which is noted here, and your entire army will instantly benefit without having to fly back to a shipyard. And finally, what happens when a player captures an alien ship? You remember we studied alien ships in a previous video, and I told you that alien ships are equipped with level 1 Security Forces technology. This means that they are somewhat protected against boarding, but if you are lucky enough, you can still capture them. In this case, the alien ship is not replaced by your player color ship. Instead, you keep the grey token and players just remember that it now belongs to you, the player who captured it. This grey captured ship cannot benefit from your player's technologies, and since you can now move this ship like any other, note that it has a level 3 move technology. And note also that there is no way to recover the alien ship's technologies. The cultural gap with your human civilization is too great. And the last special case is pirates, and the rule is simple. you cannot capture a pirate ship. Okay, fighters, mines and boarding ships, now you know everything you need to know about these special weapons and way of fighting. But I know what you're thinking. You need more, you need something stronger, you need the long-awaited level 7 ship size ship, you need the Titan. So, first, keep in mind that this is a normal ship with the same back as any other ship, and you can easily include it in a standard fleet. It moves at the same speed as everyone else, depending on your level in the move technology. A Titan is a normal ship, but a huge one, and its size brings both advantages and disadvantages. Its hull size of 5 gives it 5 hit points, but makes it difficult to build. You need a lot of shipyards or high shipyard technology. The little ×2 here means that every time it hits a target in combat, it deals 2 damages instead of 1. Note that this does not mean it rolls 2 dice. It makes a single attack with 1 die, but if it hits, it deals 2 damages. This makes it powerful against large opponents, such as a battleship or other titans, but note that this is not an advantage against small targets that have only 1 hit point. Against 2 scouts, at best, it will eliminate 1. Even with its ×2 advantage, it cannot kill 2 scouts at once. Because it is large, it cannot be screened and cannot retreat. In other words, it must fight. It therefore always accepts combat and fights to the end. And again, because he's too big, he cannot be boarded and he cannot be captured. And a ship that fires at it and rolls a 1 doesn't get an automatic hit. Usually a 1 always hit, but not against a Titan. It's just not automatic, you have to do the math. So the Titan is a very powerful unit, but now you know, because you've seen the Star Wars movies, that as big as it is, this kind of Death Star can always be destroyed by some small fighter dropping its missile right on the weak point of the fortress. First, against a Titan, only fighters benefit from the fleet bonus. This means that the 2-to-1 ratio is calculated normally with all available ships, but if the attacker is eligible for a +1 fleet bonus, only fighters can use it against the Titan. Other units, when they fire at the Titan, fire without the +1. However, of course, if they fire at other units, the normal bonus applies. In addition, fighters always get a +1 against a Titan, so that makes +2 if they also have the fleet bonus. Finally, if the fighter rolls a 1 on the die, it automatically hits. This is an exception to the rule we've just seen. Next, like a carrier ship, a Titan can transport its own fighters for defense. If it has at least level 1 fighters technology, it can transport and support 3 fighters. But be careful, unlike a carrier, even if it has fighters around it, an enemy can still target it. The enemy is not required to attack the fighters first. And finally, Titans are planet destroyers. So, if a Titan is in a planet's hexagon, as we'll see in the next video number 9, when the space combat is over, so when the entire enemy fleet has been eliminated or has retreated, the Titan can fire on the planet's colony. And then, there's no need to roll the die. Not only is the colony destroyed, but the entire planet is destroyed as well. It is replaced by an asteroid field, the planet's debris, and of course all units that were on the planet are also destroyed. Note that a Titan can destroy a planet in the same way, even if there is no colony on it. And finally, a mine does not destroy a Titan as it would any other ship. The mine can still automatically target and hit the Titan, But instead of destroying it, it deals 1 damage, and the Titan has 5 hit points. That means it takes 5 mines to destroy 1 Titan. Okay, I know that seems like a lot of rules, but I'm afraid we are not finished yet. Now we need to talk about experience. Experience is an optional rule, you don't have to use it, it doesn't interact with the other rules, so it's really up to you. Let's get started. There are 5 levels of experience: green, then skilled, then veteran, then elite, and finally legendary units. When you build a new unit, it is green, and there is nothing to say about it because it is the basic rank for all units. Then, at the very beginning of each economic phase, all green units automatically become skilled. In other words, a unit never stays green for more than 3 turns, and you don't have to do anything to make it skilled, it's automatic. From there, higher levels of experience can only be gained through combat. And I propose we first learn how experience is gained. We'll see the effects of experience later, but as you can imagine, in a nutshell, the more experienced your units are, the more effective they will be in combat. Okay, first, experience is attached to groups, so to individual tokens. This means that all ships in the same group have the same experience. If you merge 2 groups with different experience levels, you keep the lowest experience level, the worst one, but of course, as long as you have tokens available, you don't have to do this. No need to merge if you can keep both groups as 2 separate tokens. Experience is recorded on the ship technology sheet. There is a special column for this. There is an experience level for each group. If you don't write anything, it means your group is green. And if a group is not listed on this sheet, it means that experience rules don't apply to this unit. For example, there is no experience for shipyards, and we know this simply because shipyards are not listed. The same goes for ground units. To make it simple, only spaceships, units that fly, can gain experience. Experience can be gained each time a group eliminates or captures an enemy unit. As soon as one of your ships eliminates an enemy ship, the entire group to which it belongs become eligible to gain experience. The procedure is simple. First, all ships within the group must fire, and once the entire group has finished all its shots, for each enemy unit it has destroyed, it rolls a die. And the group as a whole gains 1 experience level if the result of one of these die rolls is less than or equal to twice the hull size of the victim. And since it's easier to gain experience when attacking larger opponents, a -1 modifier is applied to this die roll if the hull size of the destroyed ship is greater than the firing ships. And note that only the group that actually eliminated the enemy ship can make this die roll. Any other ship that just damaged the target without destroying it gains nothing. Now, let's look at the effects of experience. What is experience used for? There is a special combat resolution mat that isn't very useful, I think, mainly because it's a bit small. But I'll use it here to show you how it works. It's up to you whether you use it or not. Perhaps the best option would be to build your own, but a little larger. Okay, so it's simple. During combat, when a ship fires at an enemy with less experience than itself, its attack is increased by 1. A skilled yellow cruiser fires at a red battle cruiser with a green experience. Yellow cruiser is more experienced, so it attacks with a value of 5 instead of 4. Its experience bonus is +1. Note that the red battle cruiser still fires first because it is class B, while yellow cruiser is class C. Class is not affected by experience. and if a ship fires at a target 2 experience levels above it, it suffers a penalty of -1 to its attack value. If the red ship with a green experience level fires at the veteran blue ship, it fires with an attack strength of 4 instead of 5. Note that if the blue ship fires back at the red ship, it only has a +1 bonus to its attack value, and this is because only the first case applies, and if the red ship fires at the yellow ship, it does not suffer any penalty because they are only one level apart. Finally, a ship cannot fire at all at a target that has 3 more experience levels. The red ship is not allowed to attack the green ship, which is 3 levels above it. Unless there is no other possible target. If the red ship in our example is alone with the green ship, then yes, it can shoot at it because it has no other choice. But it will suffer a -1 attack value, of course, due to the previous rule. And finally, a legendary ship has 1 extra hit point, so the legendary yellow ship here has 4 hit points instead of 3. And there you go, you now understand how you gain experience and how it makes your units stronger. Let's look now at an example to help you remember everything. A group of 4 red cruisers attacks a group of 4 blue scouts. Class C, it's the red cruiser's turn to fire first, and since experience is gained by group and not by ship, we resolve all the attacks from the group at once. Red player makes his 4 attack rolls, and since everyone is green, he gets no bonus for experience. Attack 4 minus defense 0, bingo, he hits on the first shot, and he eliminates 1 scout. Second shot, same thing, the second scout is eliminated. Third shot, that one misses, but the fourth shot eliminates a third scout. Now the group has finished shooting and eliminated 3 enemy ships, therefore it has 3 chances to gain experience, 3 die rolls. Each time, the group must roll less than or equal to twice the hull size of its victims. 2 times 1 equals 2. The first roll is a miss, but the second one is a success. The group has just gained 1 level of experience. And we stop there, because in any case, a group cannot gain more than 1 experience level during the same combat. So, we note this down on the sheet right away, because the group of cruisers will benefit from their new experience level in their next attacks, even during the same combat. They are now skilled. But we mark it with a half circle to show that this level was gained during this combat and that no other level can be gained until the end of this combat. And it is only when the combat is over that you complete the half circle into a full circle, which shows that from now on it can gain experience again through other combats. And there you go, that's the basics of experience in Space Empires. Just 2 small details before we wrap up, small but important. In the economic phase, all units with elite or legendary experience, the top 2 levels, pay only half of their maintenance costs, rounded down. And there's a special military academy technology which has 2 levels. At level 1, newly created units begin as skilled instead of green. This can save you a full cycle of 3 turns. And at level 2, you get a -1 bonus every time you roll the die to gain experience. And finally, aliens and pirates are always considered skilled, so you can get bonuses against them if you are more experienced, or they can get bonuses against you if you are green. However, aliens and pirates' experience never increases. And for all other units that don't use experience, shipyards, bases, ground units, no bonuses or penalties related to experience ever apply when fighting them, and no experience can be gained from them. And there you have it. That's it for experience, an optional rule but one that I recommend. And at last, we wrap up this long video number 8. Take some time to digest all these because all these technologies and new units are the heart of the strategic choices you'll make in Space Empires. Space Empires is a game where you can always surprise your opponents because your choices are endless. But of course, there is a price to pay, a lot of choices, meaning a lot of rules to learn. But hey, Jean-Michel Grosjeau's friends are not afraid by big rulebooks, no? Even better, I'm sure that together we can say that we love big rulebooks. Am I wrong? In fact, we are so hooked that I invite you to follow me in video number 9, where we'll discuss the last chapter we don't know yet, ground combat, what happens when you decide to land on your neighbor's planet or on a super hostile alien planet. Well, if you are still interested in my colorful videos, you'll find the answers to all these questions chez Jean-Michel Grosjeau.